Bum bum bottom 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 bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 bum bum bottom bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 bum bum bottom bum bum bottom ba da da 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 ba da
You are now in session with the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. I'm Lisa Gullickson.
I'm Brad Gullickson.
And each month we evaluate a different iconic romance within the four-color realm. In this episode, we're tenuously orbiting the supermassive black hole called the Maw in our Creator Corner with writers Ryan Silbert, Luke Lieberman, and artist Bill Sienkiewicz discussing Alliance's Orphans, a narrative from the mind of Stan Lee, published by Dynamite Entertainment.
This is an absolutely stacked episode. 3 creators plus Brad and Lisa in one Love Nest Zoom room. That's a lot of talent. That's a lot of voices to manage, but I think we did it.
A lot of talent? I feel like it's like 3 talents and 2 silly gooses who have this gift for getting people to do stuff for them.
I mean, that's why I went from talent to like a lot of voices, because it seems weird to like refer to us as talented. But I mean, I guess, yeah, you're right. We do have a talent for tricking people to come onto our show, chat up their comics, reveal their process. And, you know, recently we even found a way to ensnare the Alamo Draft House in Winchester, Virginia to do our bidding.
Wah ha 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 ha. That was my evil laugh.
It's a good one.
Thanks.
We are super excited to announce on this episode that we have partnered with the Alamo Draft House as well as the Winchester Eisner-nominated comic book store, 4-Color Fantasies, to bring you a new screening series of comic book movies. And we are launching our comic book movie series with the greatest comic book movie of all time. There is no better comic book movie than this one. Let's all say it together. Howard the Duck.
I wonder if anybody listening said it along with us.
They all did, because it is universally known that this is the best comic book movie.
I know that we famously like to use famously like to use hyperbole, but I also don't want to ignite any fury by saying that Howard the Duck is the greatest comic book movie of all time.
Okay. I mean, art is subjective, okay? But our listeners, especially those that are our Patreon subscribers, they know that we are genuine defenders of the Howard the Duck movie, the first Marvel movie, if you don't count Red Sonja.
Yeah, I've never seen Red Sonja.
We got to do that. That would be a great Patreon episode.
Howard the Duck, the movie, does have a very special, downy, soft place in our hearts that we will not have disparaged.
Yeah. I mean, it's a weird movie, but it's that weirdness that really makes it unique within the space of comic book movies. And it felt like a good place to start our comic book movie series at the Alamo Draft House, because it gives you an idea of the weirdos programming it.
I agree that starting with Howard the Duck certainly sets a tone for our film series. But like what I'm excited about is that we're not just going to do superhero movies for our comic book movie film series, because there are so many comic book movies that do not have anything to do with capes and spandex.
Yeah, we're treating our comic book movie series at the Alamo Draft House the way that we treat our podcast, right? So we do couples counseling sessions of Scott and Jean, right? X-Men. Okay, great. But we also do Usagi Yojimbo. We also do Bloom.
The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Sex Criminals. We're not celebrating a genre. We're celebrating a medium that is comic books.
So we have secured Howard the Duck as our first film. We're still waiting to hear back what our February movie will be, what our March movie will be. But we're thinking movies like Friday Foster, Superman, History of Violence, Ghost World. Like, we're trying to find the entire spectrum that the art form offers.
We also have the licensing enforced limitation of not being able to do MCU movies.
Yeah, Disney does not play ball with repertory theaters yet.
Which I think, like, actually paves, like, to me, it just makes it even easier because I feel like we're all doing our annual MCU watches at home.
Yeah.
So I think that, like, we are encouraged to just go off the beaten path.
Constraints breed creativity.
That's right.
And because we have not, secured 12 movies for every month of next year, that means you listening right now, if you're in the DMV area, you can suggest movies that you want to see on the big screen at the Alamo Drafthouse in Winchester, Virginia. What's the movie you missed on the big screen that you wish you could have seen? Like Flash Gordon, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can see Flash Gordon on the big screen again. We want to hear those suggestions and we will take them into consideration.
Because we want these screenings to be like a community effort.
Yes.
A community celebration around comic books and comic book movies. And part of the mission of this film series is to create kind of like a party atmosphere where we do giveaways and we do introductions and then after the movie we all spill out into the bar/lobby and we have enthusiastic conversations. And For Color Fantasies, hopefully for all of these screenings, we'll be able to like put up a table and sell some comics, maybe have like a mini convention kind of feel.
Yeah, that's like one of the things that we miss when we go to Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Like, these are celebrations of the comics, but so much of the audience hasn't actually interacted with comics. So our goal here is you come to Howard the Duck, we're going to have some Howard the Duck comics that you can look at. We might have some Howard the Duck giveaways. We're definitely going to have some giveaways. We might have some Howard the Duck comics to actually sell to you as well. We're still working out the details with 4 Color Fantasies, but yeah, that's so exciting.
So tickets are on sale now, Sunday, January 29th at 4 p.m. I love that time. That way, like, I love a socialization in the middle of the afternoon.
Yeah.
Because then I can still have my, like, download time at the end of my day.
Yeah, and again, that means we get some extra time in the lobby to sell comics, talk comics, celebrate comics.
Yeah. I like it. Like, introvert. Like, you can still get home and get a good 8 hours.
No, the party's still going after the movie, Lisa.
So you can get your tickets on the Alamo app or the website.
Links in the show notes.
And yeah, is that all we have to say? Buy tickets, come see us. We want to see your face.
It's crazy how excited I am to be bringing Howard the Duck 1 to the big screen again. And 2, just the possibility of all the comic book movies that we could see on the screen again. And, Weird Science. Weird Science is a comic book movie. We can show Weird Science on the big screen, Lisa.
And then I can tell the story of my 13th birthday again.
Yeah, sad. Maybe we won't show Weird Science. But what about Swamp Thing? Wes Craven's Swamp Thing.
I am dying to see that on the big screen. That would be so fun.
Send your suggestions to cbccpodcast@gmail.com or tweet us at CBCC Podcast, Instagram, CBCC Podcast, Facebook, Comic Book Couples Counseling.
Yes, we are accessible, and it's all very exciting. But now we've got to get back to our episode at hand.
Yes.
Our other little group that we have in our snare, the team behind Alliances, Orphans.
Yes, and we're dropping this episode about a month before Stan Lee's 100th birthday. So it's a true honor to have these creators on the show to discuss their very unique relationship with Stan the Man.
When you think about Stan Lee and his kind of legendary icon status, what he is, like, primarily is he's the idea guy. Like, he has these huge ideas that spark the imaginations of these other creators. And so I think about Luke and Ryan kind of being the custodians of these very precious, revered things, these ideas.
Yeah, precious material. I think precious material, that's a great way of phrasing it.
And, like, just the enormous, like, magnitude of a responsibility that has to feel like.
Yeah. And, Bill Sienkiewicz, obviously we know him as the guy who radically transformed Moon Knight and brought us, like, the best moments from the New Mutants. But he never really created alongside Stan Lee. And this is as he's going to mention in this conversation, this is an opportunity to collaborate with an icon, with a hero, in a way that he never got. So, like, if you look at Alliance's Orphans, you see something of a dream come true. This is a realization of a long-held creative fantasy. And you gotta approach this work as something truly special. And this book, the graphic novel Alliance's Orphans, is a sequel to two previous storylines that were Audible originals. The universe was created by Stan Lee, Luke Lieberman, and Ryan Silbert, and for the graphic novel, they brought on Bill Sienkiewicz and artist Szymon Kudranski.
You don't have to have experienced those other iterations of the Alliance's universe, though, to read this comic book. We hadn't.
Yeah.
So this was our introduction. And what I find interesting about Alliance's Orphans is that it is focused around like a kind of pre-apocalypse event. There is this individual called the Inventor who worked for this evil villain organization as kind of like a slave or something, and he set up the structure of the universe to ultimately collapse. And while he was working, he had these other companions around him, and these are the Orphans. And so this is post the cataclysmic event. The Inventor has disappeared, and all of his companions are tired. Like, they had done so much heroics leading up to the event, and now the situation is calling upon them to do even more. And they're like, guess what? I don't want to. I've put all of this effort into saving the universe already, and now I want to start living my life.
Yeah, sorry, you're in a franchise? There's always another apocalypse coming. Should I go ahead and read the back of the book just to give a general plot synopsis?
Yeah.
As gravity waves ripple across reality, warping time and space, Earthling William Ackerson is rescued by the Orphans, a ragtag group that finds themselves over their heads when their space heist is hijacked. The Orphans are each the last of their kind, with all of their kin wiped out by the alien Hive. Unknown to these galactic scavengers, they have a stowaway with her own agenda, a fearsome survivor of a civilization that once ruled the galaxy. This extraordinary band of lone survivors must unite to save the very fabric of reality.
It's hard to read Alliance's Orphans and not think about the symbolism of this inventor who's put all of these ideas in place. And then there's this like ragtag group that is charged with fostering these ideas into a better age. And we get into that a little bit. We also get into process. We get into Luke's origins with Stan Lee. And it gives us this opportunity to talk about our cultural relationship with Stan Lee's ideas, or at least the idea of Stan Lee's ideas.
And that's where this conversation begins, with their relationship to Stan Lee before and after their business relationship. So with that tease, let's just dive into the actual conversation.
Splash.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on Comic Book Couples Counseling. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
Now comes the awkward point where we start things off by introducing all of you by your voices. So if we could do a round robin of introductions, maybe starting with Ryan up top there.
Hey, I'm Ryan Silbert. Hopefully you'll recognize my voice at 2x speed, but I listen to you guys at 1.25. So I kind of recognize your voices.
This is Luke Lieberman, and this is what I sound like.
Hey, it's Bill at I think at 0.25 speed, which is pretty much, considering like I said, I just woke up. That's probably about normal for me.
So I guess where we wanted to start this conversation is December 28th is coming up, and it is going to be the 100th anniversary of Stan Lee's birth. And I thought we could take a moment to just discuss what he meant to you as a creator and what he meant to you as a person.
I guess I'll start because I met Stan when I was a film student at NYU. He was in New York for the X-Men premiere in the year 2000. and he agreed to sit and let me interview him for my junior year documentary. And then he offered me a job after film school. So I drove to Los Angeles and worked for him for a couple of years before I went off and relaunched Red Sonja. But I always stayed tight with him. He was always, he was a family friend. And thinking about him 100 years, I've actually been kind of going back and looking at his. I mean, I can talk at length about what he meant to me as a creator and all the things he taught me, and he was a mentor. And there's personal moments I don't share, and then there's a lot of other moments I've shared in a million other interviews. But one of the things that really hit me last night as I was kind of thinking about him, because we're talking about 100 years of Stan, is just kind of how he had this. I mean, just the arc of his life. I mean, starting out, he was he was a second generation American. His parents were Romanian immigrants. His father lost his job during the Great Depression. They had to move into a really tiny apartment. He had to start work. He had to graduate high school early so that he could work and help support the family. And then he started working at Timely. And he sort of walked in the door working with legends, Jack and Joe. And then he actually volunteered to join the Army in World War II. And he was a playwright. I mean, there were only a few people with that designation. It was like him and, Dr. Seuss and Charles Addams and Frank Capra. And they were like a group of them that would make entertainment and pamphlets and whatnot for the troupe, which is some really kind of cool contemporaries. And then he worked for Timely for years. He had to go fight in Congress because I don't know which one to say, the buzzkills of the time thought comic books were ruining children. So he had, he created the Comic Code Authority, and he had to kind of go fight for him. He fought for comic books as a medium more broadly. He was on the verge of quitting. Then he had an opportunity to create the Fantastic Four, and then he went on a run in the 60s and created more comic book IP than anyone in history in 10 years or 12 years or whatever that kind of run was. And then they kicked him upstairs, and he became kind of the ambassador for the industry. And he just never stopped. I mean, by the time I met him, right, it was 2000. So he was in his late 70s. And there was never a point that I knew him where he wasn't enthusiastic about some idea that he was so spontaneously creative. Ideas would just kind of pour out of him. And he wasn't precious about it. He didn't think that they were all brilliant. He was happy to throw some to the side if they didn't work. But if you were in his presence for any extended period of time, you would hear a million different sort of concepts and ideas. Like his brain was just kind of always firing it off. And even in his 90s, he said, look, if he didn't have a company to come to try to, turn these ideas into things, he would just be sitting at home, writing them all out. He there's no off button for him, and he was just the kind of diligence and just how long he was able to maintain that kind of enthusiasm for life and that kind of enthusiasm for storytelling I've never seen anything like it. That was Luke, by the way, unless you couldn't tell by my voice.
I mean, look, I came at it as a fan before I ever got a chance to sit in a room with him and work with him. And that was, an incredible honor. But as a fan, when I think about 100 years, it's amazing to me because the two things that I took away from Stan as a fan and as a creator is two. One is his kind of democratization of how willing he was to teach how approachable comics were and how to create them. So actually, one of the first things I ever bought at a convention was The Secrets to Comics that he created in 1940 something. And it was a pamphlet of how to create comics and how to write them. And it's something I've carried with me. I mean, it was like I bought it maybe for 25 cents because it wasn't like a collector's item at the time. And it's something that he really gave us tools as creators to move forward. And he was always so willing and generous with that, whether you're working directly with him or not. And, the same way I look at the letter pages, he created a community for all of us, that we're all the beneficiaries of in the soapboxes. But I will say the most amazing thing about him when it comes to those kinds of ideas is think about 100 years. this art form is so young, and you see people like Stan working it, and then you just see people like Bill who like took it to another level artistically. And it's just like the innovation that's happened in these 100 years is amazing. I mean, you know, we got nothing on music and we've done so much. So Stan is a huge part of that.
And Bill, could you add to that? You have obviously a unique experience with Stanley as well.
Yes, yeah, but it's wonderful actually sitting here and listening to Ryan and Luke talk about their actual connection to him, which was in some ways far deeper and than mine. Even though I think at the time I started working for Marl, Stan had sort of shifted into that sort of not figurehead exactly, but sort of liaison ambassador. Jim Shooter was the editor-in-chief at the time that I came on board. Stan would come by the office on occasion, and that was always sort of it's like a visit from Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny all at once. It was it was really pretty wonderful. I mean, there was sort of these hushed tones, like Stan's here, Stan. It was that kind of day when he would come by. And my experience with him was pretty similar in terms of growing up with, with that sense of belonging to something. I think it's probably, pretty commonplace to sort of scratch the, any comic book person, maybe feeling somewhat isolated and, not really belonging. And then there was something about Marvel specifically that where it felt like you were part of a family and part of a special kind of group of fans and storytellers, what have you, that it just was so wonderful to sort of feel like you could actually like I said, belong. I mentioned a story, to both Ryan and Luke at one point in the past, but I don't know if the listeners have heard this before, but so I'll try to be brief. But I did have one meeting with Stan, a personal meeting, because every time I would see him, other than that, it would sort of be in the midst of a lot of people. But there was one time. This is after I'd done Elektra, and I think even Toasters had come out, and Stan was at a convention, and so one of the people who work with Stan came over to my booth and tapped me on the shoulder and said, Stan would like you to join him on the panel because he was about to moderate a panel, and and it's sort of like. When Stan invites you over, there's no way to say no. And I was just super excited. So I went over and we talked. It was great to meet him. I mean, he was so effusive and so on point and so aware of, of sort of who the newer guys were, and very complimentary of, about the medium and about what certain things I was trying to accomplish or to do at the time. So it was like just two guys talking shop at that point, and we were off mic, but the whole place was, filling up, and he was, like I said, he was complimentary, but I got a chance to tell him what he meant to me. And then when it was time to begin, he went from being sort of Stan, the human being, and the comics professional, and the pro, and you could just again tell the effusiveness of how he was, that he just loved the medium as well. But when it became time to for him to take over the panel, he sort of flipped the switch and became, Stan the human being, but went from being Stan the human being to Stan the icon. Mm-hmm. And that was really pretty wonderful to sort of be there. It was like, it would be like watching, Bruce Banner, or David Banner, depending on which iteration, sort of Hulk out. I was there, I saw it,
Amazing. As sort of shepherds and guardians to his ideas now with alliances, do you feel a weight and a responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that we're not putting out just reams and reams of product, right? We're working from a world building sort of materials that we created with Stan for years. We can get into the process, but when we first started developing this, we weren't doing it. We weren't trying to create like a treatment for a TV Bible or like a movie pitch or something like that, or we knew we were going to go to comics. We just wanted to build the world. We were just sort of having a big Dungeons and Dragons session with Stan. Now we sort of have all that, and we're trying to be very thoughtful about how we put material out, right? Like this book, Orphans, which is the third in the series, and the first done as a graphic novel comic book, it only really made sense when Bill became a possibility. Like we were only going to do it if we could do it with some groundbreaking talent that elevated the book to the level that we thought it needed to be. And that's kind of the way we've always treated. That's the way we treated the last book that Will Wheaton read for us, and the one before that we did with Yara Shahidi.
Yeah, I should interject that I was and am honored to be part of Alliances and Orphans with these two fine gentlemen. It really does feel like it's a for me like a connection to Stan. Like I said, I never got a chance to actually work with him, but I certainly feel like I am now. In the form of my colleagues here. So it's really wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, Ryan, follow that up with something meaningful and heartfelt.
No. We're just happy to be sharing this with fans and getting their feedback too. Like the reactions we've been getting have been really special, and that's the part that we miss not having. Stan not being here for that is sad, but it's also a celebration every time you get to interact with a fan and discuss the ideas that come out of Orphans and Alliances, because there are some pretty deep ideas that were put into this.
Yeah, like that's what I take away. So Orphans is my first introduction to the Alliances universe, and it is like these enormous ideas that are deeply metaphorical. And I was wondering, when you are taking these ideas and turning them into visuals and turning them into a story, do you feel yourself engaging directly with the metaphor and shaping the metaphor? Or are you just letting the metaphor speak for itself?
The second. And that would be, for Stan, the heart of the story is always the characters. You can have these kind of larger ideas and set pieces and all the rest of that, but ultimately you just need storytelling that comes organically out of the character arcs. And, some of these sort of philosophical structures or whatever you want to call them that are around the story, they need to just come organically out of the story itself, as opposed to being kind of imposed. I mean, I think whenever you have some kind of agenda to, some sort of message that you're trying to cram into a story, that never works. Like you have to, if the message has to the extent it comes out, I mean, you need to have one. I think Stan once said in one of his soapbox, he said, a story without a message is like a man without a soul. So it needs to have one, but you can't beat the audience over the head with it. It needs to just naturally flow out of the storytelling, and the storytelling is what comes first.
I'd be interested to hear, Bill, because we provided you with material that we had written with Stan, like what your kind of feedback was, is that guys, the prologue is its own sort of unique piece that is the sort of foundation for Alliances. It's one of the earliest things we wrote with Stan, and that's part of why we were so precious about how we would reveal it. And Bill, I mean, you were one of the first people to really see that, and certainly the first one to bring it to the page.
Well, yeah, that was. I mean, as you're talking, I'm listening and thinking about, that everything in that context and in the context of the question. For me, again, I agree that having you don't want a situation where the tail is wagging the dog. I mean, I think unfortunately, storytelling right now sort of feels that there's a lot of agenda-driven work that's out there, and it does feel like it really kind of takes away from the whole storytelling experience. And that's the one thing that I sort of feel it like typifies, embodies and sort of represents everything that Stan stood for, was about telling really great stories. And I feel that agendas and messages and everything else, it's fine to blend them in. I mean, if you think about, when I think about the comics that I grew up reading, written by Stan Lee, I mean, they were, some of them were over the top, bombastic and fun and deep and, exhilarating. And I'm sure there were messages in there, but I was just having such a good time reading and caring about the characters that I didn't feel like somebody had sort of dropped in and said, "Hey, did you see that? Did you get that message right there?" It's like, it's like, hey, I'm enjoying the story. I'm really having a good time. It's like the messages are folded in. It's like it's it's like having some sugar in your coffee. It's like, hey, did you enjoy the entire bag of sugar? Like, look, I like a little sweet, please, or not. But what struck me about working with Ryan and Luke on the prologue, and again, I realize I'm repeating myself. These gentlemen have heard me say this before, but I felt there was so much there that I did it. I think I asked for a few extra pages, but there's an entire series just on all the everything that was in the prologue. It's wonderful sometimes when you get it's a bittersweet. Let me put it this way: it's actually bittersweet having to sort of decide like how big I want to go or can go, because there's just too much to choose from to show, and I have to actually like kind of dial it back and I love the idea that there's a lot in the tank, so to speak, to run with and opportunities, as opposed to how do I pad this and sort of, there's no padding here. It's like it literally was painful to have to make a decision about how, where to draw the line.
That's what Lisa and I were talking about with this universe and with the universes that Stan Lee had created in the past. You look at those early issues and just in like a number one issue, you can sense an entire universe at play. And in alliances, you can sense that entire universe and you can go anywhere. And so I am curious about that process that you initially had. And did it start like in around 2017? I read that number, but I'm not 100% sure.
It predates that, because that's when we started with our Audible original.
Okay.
But it certainly predates that. And like Luke mentioned, it was an on and off thing with Stan, with him especially, because he was the mentee. Luke could speak to the origins.
Yeah, we the way that this sort of unfolded is that, let's see how personal I want to get here, but as someone who had lost his parents, and Stan was a mentor, I wanted to make sure to check in with him. Like, it was just kind of a thing that I knew to do with an older person that you were close to, that you make an effort to check in with them and you don't let time go by because you don't want to have regrets. That's just something I guess I learned in life. So I would make a point once every 2 weeks, once a month, to check in with him. At that point, I was an attorney, but my office was down the street from his, and I would just call his assistant and find a window when Stan would be around. I'd go, knock on his door and hang out. And one of those sessions, we started to talk about some ideas, and we sort of came up with the idea that is present in the prologue about an inventor whose people are wiped out, and the aliens that wipe him out keep him as like a specimen. They use his genius to build them weapons, and so he's sort of being forced to build weapons for his oppressor, and then he builds his greatest weapon and uses it to get revenge on them. And like there was that kind of kernel of it. And, that was just something that came up in a dialogue, and Stan seemed to go, yeah, okay, that one's actually pretty good, that kind of thing. And so when I was walking out the door, I just had this feeling like Stan was open to engaging in a creative process, and that we could keep that going. So, I went home and I did as much development on this as I could. And then I knocked on his door again. And he's I like this. I don't like that. You know what? Why don't we try something like this? And he'd throw a few ideas, and then I'd go back. And that process went on for maybe about a year. And then I realized that I needed help workshopping, because Stan's time was precious, and I wanted to bring back to him, the best work I possibly could every time I had a chance to sit down with him and develop with him. And Ryan was a friend from Comic-Con. So it was, I don't know, what is it, Comic-Con 2013 or 2014, somewhere in there. And I looked at him and asked him if he wanted to. I mean, we were like out after the parties drinking. It was not a sober moment. We were getting really crappy food somewhere in the Gaslight District, and I asked him if he wanted to work on this with me, and of course he said yes. And then we would sort of workshop stuff and have calls, or we would see Stan and sort of, here's where we're at, and then he would give us more direction, give us a few more ideas, throw out whatever he didn't like, and that was kind of the process for a while. I don't know if I'm answering your question or if I'm just
totally.
Well, one thing I'm sorry.
Yeah, jump in.
Is just listening to we talk about like eating junk food and perhaps like imbibing a bit of alcohol in the Gaslamp District at Comic-Con. But one of the things that's really bringing a smile to my face is just everybody sort of tries to imagine what it's like to create the creative process of creating, like at all. But in terms of writing comic book series, or something that or drawing it. I'm just listening, and it's like I'm having these flashbacks, of what the creative process is for me, and just there's a guerrilla aspect, a guerrilla sort of creativity that I'm hearing here, and I don't think that could be understated in terms of, in some respects, the kind of wonderful aspect of that. There's something down and dirty and fun, and the kind of thing that you look back on and you're like, I can't believe that, how some of these things, these storytelling ideas or story beats that will come out of, just dropping yourself into a situation that you might not have been in before, and to me, I just love the idea of how everything sort of grew organically. To me, that's really exciting.
Well, that's where, like, that's exactly right. That guerrilla aspect is totally it, because if you like pre-engineer something to be like specifically like it's going to lead into this huge big event, blah 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 blah, like it doesn't really work that way, and it always feels a little bit trite when you do it that way. In our situation, it was like, is this going to be a TV movie, characters for comic books? Let's rush it to this. Let's do that. And it's like, for us, because we're all independent and we are able to run alliances independently, we can make choices like to work in the formats we love and honor them in the way that they're best. These stories are best suited for. Like an immersive, imaginative, personal story is great for audio. A big bombastic cosmic scaled project is great for a graphic novel. And that's one of the kind of fortunate things we've been able to find partners that are like willing to go on that journey with us, because there's a tendency nowadays to like rush everything into the market with like a predetermined kind of way of where it should go and stuff like that. And like Luke said, we're just pulling out trading cards at this point. Like, it's fun. It's like it's super fun to do it this way.
Ryan, for the record, you just interrupted me when I was going to compliment you, because he was talking about getting dropped in. Ryan did kind of get dropped in mid-process, and the benefit of having someone come in with fresh eyes to the sort of mania of what Stan and I were creating was that there was a great benefit to having someone who, having someone come in at that point in the process who can tell you what makes sense when you're not making sense, what works, someone with a pair of fresh eyes was a real boon to us.
Thanks, Luke.
I kind of just getting to know you guys and better, and more. I sort of feel like Stan and Luke were in the car, driving along and bantering, throwing ideas, and you were like asked to come on board, and instead of at that moment being invited into the car, you were like running up alongside the car to get up to speed.
Yeah,
and
we didn't slow down. No, we didn't slow down.
Like,
we could jump in through the window.
And you get actually get in.
If you've ever been to Comic-Con, that's not actually in a car. It's on one of those little trolley things where you are actually kind of like holding onto the bike coming up the hill. It's tough.
But the smile on my face just hearing how this all came about is just huge here. So because this to me like about process that I find so fascinating. So I'm just going to sit here, shut up, and just grin.
What I find so inspirational about Stan Lee and the creatives of his era is like the idea of abundance when it comes to ideas. And I think sometimes, like, as a creative personally, it's just like, I'm like, oh, I'm scrounging for an idea. I just need an idea. And then when I find my idea, like, okay, my idea is precious and I'm not going to share it. You know what I mean? Like, until I have fully developed it and it's my brilliant thing. And so, like, I would love to know, like, what it is like to be in an environment where the end product is precious, but the ideas are like cheap and abundant. And like the continued interaction with Stan Lee's ideas, does it create like a continued intimacy with the person who was Stan Lee?
I'm going to answer the first question first, which is
Okay.
that sometimes it was absolutely brutal because you would have, workshopped something for a week and you're so stoked and you thought it all the way through and every possible, and look at all the ways it can interact with all the other parts of the world. And you'd get in there and Stan be like, yeah, it didn't work. No, I don't like it. And he didn't really waste time on your feelings. He would just kind of cut through it. And, it was, you got kind of thick skinned about it. And but the first time it happened, you were just, and there'd be, so there's a story, it's actually in the afterword of the first book on Trick of Light in the print edition. And we had been developing this world now for years, and we decided that Stan liked the idea of doing an audiobook, and Audible wanted to partner up. So we were going to make the first thing as an audiobook, and we had this sort of whole the story was already pretty much developed on what we were going to do. And so now, deal's done with Audible. We're sitting down in a room with him, talking about kind of pacing out the book and everything. And he just it's like he hadn't looked at it in 2 or 3 months. And he just kind of looked at it and was like, yeah, no, I don't think all this works. And like, he threw out about half of it, and like, we had already sold this to Audible. Like, this was the treatment that we had already given them. And he was just like, yeah, no, why don't we try something like this? And I think if it was anyone other than Stan, it might've been a real problem, because it was Stan. Audible was like, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds better, but like, when you sort of signed contracts and pre-sold a story in, and Stan just looked at it again and cut half of it out. But he had this attitude that sort of, with ideas where there's always more where those came from. Like, just don't be precious. It either works or it doesn't. Maybe you put that idea away. Maybe we'll find a place for it later, but it doesn't go here. And that was just his. I think at that point also was a function of his experience. I mean, he'd worked collaboratively for so long on so many stories, and he'd heard so many ideas thrown at him for, that he just, it was all liquid to him. It was all kind of water to him. And he just had this ability to kind of cut through all the noise and get to kind of the heart of the story, to reduce things to their simplest essence, to figure out how to kind of build those building blocks. And then you can put the coats of paint and all the rest on later.
Yeah, we really looked at one of the things we did when we were expanding into Orphans is looked at a lot of Stan's, pre-Marvel, the timely era stuff, like the sci-fi serials, the Journey into Mystery, the Tales of Suspense. And what's incredible is like, you really look at what he was laying down with his artists, and like you were saying with the abundance thing, it's totally true. Like there are characters that were created for like 15 pages or 24 pages, and then they're just like never revisited again. But the relationships are so strong in those. They may as well be the foundation for another Doctor Strange. And, that was happening monthly for like 20 years prior to Fantastic Four kicking off the Marvel Age. So it's like, you're right. Like it was almost like in the conversation with his work now, it's like it's freeing to look back on those tales, because you're not really like saddled with like all this continuity of like, oh my God, there's another Spider-Man story that's going to be reinterpreted by an artist or a writer. Here, it's like you could see how Stan was able to, and Ditko in those early days were able to just kind of like keep pushing, because there was a deadline to be met and they had to have something down on paper. So it's freeing for me, because certainly I'm the one and Luke will tell you this, and probably Bill will too, now that he knows me a little bit better. I will hold on to that idea and I'll be just like, I love that theme. And if we get rid of that, that's going to be like, it's going to be tragic and the whole house of cards is going to fall apart. But, I've learned to fight my demons.
And Bill, is that part of your philosophy now too? Like, are you precious about your ideas, or can you throw them away easily?
That old expression about, killing your babies kind of thing. I found that that's more true. And the thing is that the baby that you end up creating is it might be some kind of Frankenstein's monster, but in the most beautiful sense, that being brutal in a compassionate way about what you have to let go of, because again, for me, the only thing that matters is the story. And if you're telling a good story with good characters, you're kind of honoring and treating this both, the story, all the characters, and certainly, collaborators and also the readers and viewers with utmost respect, because you're really letting them, become part of, you're giving them the absolute best. And, to me, that's really what it's all about.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure talking to you about Alliances and Orphans. And I feel so much emotion when discussing the continuation of Stan Lee's ideas, which are so present in what you have in this graphic novel. But it also is very contemporary. It doesn't feel rooted in the past in any way. It's kind of a marvel that you were able to put this together and get it out there.
Pun intended?
Yeah, pun intended.
That was an intentional pun.
Yeah.
Well, so you guys, what did you think? Like, we always want to hear what people think of this stuff. So what did you think?
Oh, I mean, we had a blast with it. Like I said, it feels like something that could have been created in 1964, but it doesn't feel strangled by that era either, and that's such a relief.
And I am like a very like message forward reader. When Bill was talking about who wants to eat all of the sugar, that's me. I'm like, I go straight for the sugar. So I was like, I was pulling messages out about like, you have to work through your past. On the other side of your past, there is this whole universe of opportunities if you just get over the story that you are telling yourself. And
the danger of narrative.
And it goes back to like, you're working through Stan Lee's ideas. And if you became stuck and stopped at Stan Lee's ideas, you would not have broken through to this entire universe that is now Alliances, this place of infinite possibility. Like, and I think that's a lot about like what comics is about too. We think about so much about creating a canon and continuity, and we can allow that to stop us and hold us like Will Ackerson at the beginning. But then if we break through, there is this whole universe of possibilities built on our past. So I love the Sugar Man. I love it.
Wow. Oh, well, I actually just hear you say that. That's actually really enlightening for me to hear in terms of, I worry about getting in the way and stomping all over the message, by sort of playing into it whenever I'm working on something. So the fact that I always try to get out of the way so that the message can kind of come through if it's there. But it's interesting because the fact that you are so into finding it is really it's not that it's so different from the way that I think of in terms of what my goals as a collaborator or a creator on a project is. But thank you. That's very intriguing to sort of hear your point of view on that, and the fact that it doesn't upset you, or that you actually enjoy it and look for it. That's really kind of amazing to me. I love that.
That's where Lisa lives.
Thank you for finding that. That makes me feel way better.
Okay. Well, thank you for the book, because I know that as you can tell, I found it very inspirational, and I think that there are ideas in there that I'm going to return to and use to inform my life, which is what stories are for.
That is a high compliment. So
I will also say, I'm sorry, I just interrupted. Luke.
No, go ahead. I'm just.
I also do agree. I mean, reading the book and the experience of working with Luke and Ryan has been like amazing. But it also feels very much, and I will absolutely agree with what you just said. It feels like it's brand new, but also very reminiscent of that era. And it's in a way, for me, it's almost like I'm getting a chance to work with Stan, even though I never got a chance to work with Stan. And that feels really, I could sort of tick that box, and it's just very, very exciting.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on Comic Book Couples Counseling. It was a real pleasure, and we look forward to promoting the book with our listeners and continuing to bring the story and its metaphors with us into our daily lives. And we look forward to the next chapter.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Okay, we're back in the Love Nest, and I have two thoughts, Lisa.
Okay.
One, Bill Sienkiewicz leaves the chat saying that he was happy to be here, and I am taking that as gospel.
That means he totally wants to come back.
Yes.
That's how I'm reading into it.
Yes. And two, my goodness, it was something when Luke turned the podcast on us and said, no, I need you to tell us what you think of our comic.
Yeah, the hot seat.
The hot seat. That's such a weird place to be. But I also feel like, all our questions are us telling him what we think of the comic, right?
Yeah, I think I was uniquely prepared to share my thoughts about Alliance's Orphans, just because, after I finished reading it, I really felt like I had to consider it and really take my time to figure out exactly what was being told to me.
Yeah.
And so I had kind of articulated that in my mind when formulating the questions. And so I was happy to be asked, frankly. I had really thought hard about it.
Ultimately look at Alliance's Orphans as this reflection of what Stan Lee was doing back in the 50s and 60s with Marvel Comics, and a continuation of what worked back then with some slight modifications. This comic feels very classic without feeling dusty, but also maybe there's a little dust on it, and that little dust is attractive.
To me, I feel like as time marches on, we continue to romanticize the idea of Stan Lee and his contributions. And I think towards the end of his life, now this is a total presumption for which I have no evidence, but
oh boy,
I think it would be hard to be Stan Lee and not romanticize your own past, or at least present a romanticized idea of your own past and your own contributions.
What made Stan Lee Stan Lee? What was so exceptional about him was the mythology that he erected around himself in Marvel Comics. Mm-hmm. That is the appeal. And we know that it is not a function of truth, right?
Yeah, not entirely.
But that's why I go to stories. I go to stories for stories, right?
Really, when Stan Lee went into creating comics in the first place, he's like, I need a job. you know, and I know that he loved to write, and he had to put out a book at regular intervals.
Yes.
And now, like, people, you know, towards the end of his life go up to him and go, like, you're the idea guy. Deliver some Stan Lee high quality, great, brilliance. And this is what he offered.
And there's some nerves involved when thinking about his life being continued after he's gone, right? Like his work, his creativity, his thought process, his ideas living on without him. And, you know, the brand of Stan Lee being so valuable. And it makes you nervous, right?
Yeah.
As a fan of his work. But what we saw here in this conversation is that Luke, Ryan, and Bill are just as concerned about all of that stuff. And what they are working from is a place of love.
A place of love and a place of going through the ideas, not being like so overly preservational that they can't extend the lore.
Yeah. I think this conversation is going to pair so well with our next episode, where this one was the Stan Lee celebration. Our next chat with a creator is going to be our Jack Kirby celebration.
That's right.
And that's with Alex Ross talking about his new book, Fantastic Four Full Circle. And we've already had that conversation. It is an exceptional one.
Yeah.
It is also sort of a continuation of our Sue and Reed session series from a few months back. This feels like a second opinion on our thoughts on Sue and Reed with Alex Ross, making it pretty special in the comic book couples counseling world.
A completely separate thought from that, but still talking about Alex Ross. Like, I had no idea what he was going to be like.
Sure.
Like, everything I know about Alex Ross is his booths at Comic-Con.
Yes.
And how they're kind of like, you know, white painted walls.
They're museum pieces.
They're very austere.
Yeah, you walk into Comic-Con and it's very Comic-Con, you know, cosplay and these crazy statues and these action figures and these toys everywhere. But when you find the Alex Ross booth, actually a lot like when you find the Bill Sienkiewicz booth, it's like you have walked into the National Mall on the Smithsonian.
Yeah, it's manned by people in suits and business.
Shout out to
wear.
Sal.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
But Alex Ross was completely warm, completely open, but in conversation with him, just like his paintings feel like, okay, this is a literally true painting of Superman or whatever. He reads the Fantastic Four as if they are literally true.
He reads the Fantastic Four the way that you do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thinking of them as real characters, real persons, real people.
Yeah, and then here comes Brad and like, yeah, but let's talk about the relationship of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and how it formed that relationship with those characters.
That's also in there. That's also in there. Not to get into spoilers.
But Alex Ross is like you, where he approaches these characters as if they are human beings and then let's deconstruct it from there.
Right.
Yeah. So you've got that to look forward to. That's going to be our Thanksgiving treat to all of you listeners. Enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as well. And you need to prepare yourself to return to our couples session series on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, as our next episode in that series will be on the Archie Comics era, specifically the Dreamland arc, which is real damn weird.
You're gonna want to read along with us. Unfortunately, the trade paperback is out of print. That would be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Adventures Volume 15, but you can get it via Comixology Unlimited, or you can buy the digital copy.
And you're going to want to. It's well worth it because, again, like, this comic is crazy.
I think Raphael is like an independent business owner.
Yeah, there's
with
also,
his girlfriend Mezcal.
There's two Raphaels at one point because one comes from the future, and then they go to the past, and then they fight Hitler.
Yeah.
It's you.
I love how I find that, like, my thing of like what's outrageous is like they're starting a restaurant business in this economy.
Yeah, that's the weird thing. Not the angels in this storyline.
Right.
Like, yeah, like these comics are done at Archie, but they're through the Mirage Studios. So it has that little bit of dangerous energy that the original books did. Yeah, don't miss out. Don't miss out.
And of course, we'll be using a relationship expert to talk about the sibling dynamics between the four brothers. And it is Dr. Don Hubner, and her book, The Sibling Survival Guide, Surefire Ways to Solve Conflicts, Reduce Rivalry, and Have More Fun with Your Brothers and Sisters. Okay, Brad.
Yes.
I'm getting spaghettified, being sucked into a black hole.
No, not the mall.
Where can our listeners send the words of affirmation to you?
You can find me on all social medias at MouthDork. If you have words of affirmation for our logo, you can send them to Aaron Prescott at A Cool Hand Fluke. And if you have some words of affirmation for our radical banner art and show posters, send them to Karen Charm at Karen_X-Men Lisa, where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
I am always accepting words of affirmation at Sidewalk Siren on Instagram and Twitter. If you'd like to spend more quality time with us, you can subscribe to us on Podbean, Stitcher, YouTube, Google, and Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to get exclusive, you can join our Patreon, where you'll get more content, including weekly bonus episodes.
If you'd like to reach out and touch us electronically, you can email the podcast, cbccpodcast@gmail.com. You can visit our website, comicbookcouplescounseling.com, where we're having way more interviews. We've got a lot of interviews out there right now. We just finished chatting with Kurt Pyers as well.
Yeah.
About It's Only Teenage Wasteland. That was a really wonderful chat. So there's all kinds of goodies on the website. The creators of Ice Cream Man are going to be there real soon, so make sure you hop on over there. And of course, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at CBCC Podcast.
You can give us the gift of 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and if you'd like to do an act of service, why not write a review of the show while you're there? We're fluent and receptive in all 5 love languages. It really warms our hearts and helps the pod.
So until next time, friends, keep your love tank full.
And your psychic rapport open.
Once I introduce into the conversation, I'm probably going to have like this awkward moment where I'm going to have all of you introduce your voices to the listeners so that they can differentiate between who is talking. So prepare yourself to introduce yourself.
Prepared.
And boop.